All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get our meeting started. If you would all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much. May I have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Engler,
Here.
Councilmember Jones,
Here.
Councilmember McCoy,
Present.
Mayor Adam.
And I'm here. I don't believe there's any requests for continuances, so we're going to do a special presentation. I'm going to go down to the podium.
Or do you want me to stay?
Right next to me. And I'm going to welcome this evening Colleen Briner-Schmidt, and she is representing the Unified Association of Caneo Teachers. And this is kind of a special occasion because I believe it's the 116th birthday of Theodore Geisel, otherwise known as Dr. Seuss.
It is indeed.
Yes, and unbeknownst to me, Dr. Seuss wrote 60 books and won the Pulitzer Prize for Green Eggs and Ham. That's quite an accomplishment. But as I understand it, you use his birthday, which is March 2nd, to designate that day as Read Across America Day, which I think is great. And the Conejo Valley Unified School District and the United Association of Caneo Teachers co-sponsors the event, and it promotes reading and literacy amongst your students. So tell us a little bit more about the programs that you have planned.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Good evening. I'm Colleen Briner-Schmidt, a transitional kindergarten teacher, and I am president of the Unified Association of Caneo Teachers. I want to thank you at the city for all that you do for the children of the Conejo Valley Unified School District. I personally am especially grateful for the spectacular libraries that you have provided for our community. And tonight I'd like each one of you to do something personal. I'd like you to do it with me. I would like you to commit to take a half hour on March 2nd, or actually any time that week, to read with a child. On March 2nd, for many of our schools, they are actually celebrating the entire week, the National Education Association, the California Teachers Association, and UACT are sponsoring a celebration of reading that we call NEA's Read Across America. Our goal is to have every child and every school reading with a caring adult for at least 30 minutes that day. Research has proved that children who read and are read to daily do better in school. A child's ability to read has a direct effect on their future success. Reading with your child helps increase their vocabulary and improves their fluency and comprehension. Excuse me. Part of developing a lifelong love of reading is also giving children books with characters who represent them and have different experiences from them. In our diverse and complex society, students need books that provide both windows and mirrors if we're going to create more readers, more writers, and people who feel included and recognized, and who understand that the world is far richer than just their experiences alone. What is better than to snuggle in a lap and explore a book together? We have some noble company in this effort. Our partners nationally are the International Reading Association, the National PTA, First Book, PBS, and We Need Diverse Books, among others. All have recognized the benefit of giving all children access to diverse books. And we'd like you to join us in endorsing the Read Across America program and to personally commit to reading on March 2nd at a school near you or to a special child in your life. Mr. Mayor, I ask that you and the other city council members explore the possibility of joining our goal of having every child in every school in our community reading with a caring adult and to celebrate the joy of reading, whether it's a beloved classic or something new and exciting. I personally am a Pete the Cat fan. We encourage you to spread the joy of reading. As a teacher, I ask everyone to participate in this worthwhile cause, whether it's donating books to the local library or one of the many libraries that you see sprouting up around town, or encouraging your own children to pick up a book and read. Everyone can do something on March 2nd. So help us celebrate a nation of diverse readers and commit to engage in programs and activities that make America's children the best readers in the world. And again, thank you for our libraries.
Thank you very much, Colleen. Reading is absolutely essential to success in life, and it opened up great gateways to the world. I'm so happy that you're doing this. I'd like to present this proclamation to you in honor of the Read Across America Day. And again, I thank you so much for helping our kids, like you said, become the best readers in America.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, let us open it up for public comments.
This is the time and place for public comments. A speaker card is available for those wishing to address the City Council regarding items on the agenda or on a subject within the city's jurisdiction. Speakers for a public hearing item shall be called and heard during the public hearing. All remarks should be addressed to the council as a whole, and all documents for City Council and the official record should be presented to the city clerk prior to speaking. Speakers are requested to state their name and community of residence for the record. Under state law, public comment matters may not be considered by the council unless listed on the agenda, but may be referred to the city manager for administrative follow-up. 3 individuals have presented cards, and pursuant to City Council standards, speakers are allowed 3 minutes. The yellow light displays when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you very much. And if you'd please state your name and city residence. First up, we have Chase Rashid, followed by Dan Garcia. Evening,
Hello,
Chase.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Chase Rashid, City of Thousand Oaks. I'm actually here tonight to talk about an event I am hosting. It's going to be February 23rd at the Goebel Center. It's Martin Luther King I Have a Dream Day, and I don't know which way you fix this so you can see it. So you can see that on the thing. Okay. Yeah, TOTV. I have a yes. So that's the event. It's free entry, open to everybody. I encourage staff and residents to attend. We're going to have a guest speaker. He's a veteran. He's a comedian now. We're going to have entertainment, people from here in the county. My mom's going to tell the story of a fallen civil rights activist, and it's going to be a really good event, and I encourage everybody to come. Oh, and we're also having an essay contest for high school students, so we'll be doing that. So it's going to be a great event, and I encourage everybody to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Chase. Dan Garcia, followed by Willie Lubka. Evening.
Good evening, Mayor Adam and councils and City Council. My name's Dan Garcia. I'm with the Greater Conejo Valley Chamber of Commerce as the Manager of Government Affairs and Tourism, and I'm here to give a report on behalf of the Chamber. So as you know, the 2020 census will be coming on April 1st, 2020 this year, and as you may also know, this census is very important for the allocation of federal funds into our communities, and I'm here to report that the Chamber will be taking an active role in promoting the 2020 census in our newsletters, which has a reach of over 3,000 people, and our groups that are within the Chamber, such as our committees and our networking groups. One of the committees that I lead is our Legislative Roundtable, which is a committee dedicated to public policy and more information on that. We will be featuring a representative from the U.S. Commerce Department that will be talking about the 2020 census and how our community can get more involved. And we will also be having our 2020 Blue Diamond Recognition Gala at the Hyatt Regency Westlake on Friday, March 26th, beginning at 6:30 p.m. We will be featuring 10-time All-Star and 1974 National League MVP Steve Garvey. So we're really excited to have him MC this event. People who are honored at this event are nominated by their peers, and just to give you an idea of all the honorees that are here, Man of the Year will be Scott Harris, CEO of Mustang Marketing. Woman of the Year, Leanne Nielsen, Provost and VP of CLU. Nonprofit of the Year, Conejo Free Clinic. Volunteer of the Year, Bob Bland. Corporate Sponsor of the Year, Tech Ahead. Ambassador of the Year, Debbie Soden, and finally, Business of the Year, Atara Biotherapeutics. Finally, for my last announcement, we will be doing Principal for a Half Day, as we do yearly, on Tuesday, March 24th, beginning at 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. For those who don't know, Principal for a Half Day is an opportunity for community members to, it's pretty self-explanatory, where they get to be a principal for a half day. People who sign up get to go to a school of their preference, and at the end of this event, it concludes with a luncheon and an update from the District Superintendent, Mark McLaughlin, and this luncheon will be hosted at the Palm Garden Hotel this year. And you can sign up and learn more about this event at conejochamber.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Willie Lubka. Evening, Mr. Lubka.
Good evening, Mayor Adam and council members. My name is Willie Lupka. I live in Thousand Oaks. I am a participant in an organization called the Conejo Valley Interfaith Association. The purpose of the Conejo Valley Interfaith Association is to create a sacred space for clergy and interfaith representatives to dialogue and commune together by seeking out and celebrating our commonalities while accepting and respecting our differences in belief and practice in order to live together in greater understanding, peace, and harmony. Our motto is the Golden Rule, which is common to most religious traditions. One should treat others as one would like others to treat them. All faiths are welcome. The Conejo Valley Interfaith Association is working in collaboration with the Simi Valley Interfaith Council and the Ventura County Interfaith Community on an upcoming interfaith event called Love Your Neighbor Weekend. We're inviting people of faith and goodwill to join us in lifting up the values of loving our neighbor, welcoming the stranger, and respecting the inherent dignity and worth of every person. The dates of the program are March 12th to the 15th. On Thursday evening, March 12th, we're hosting an interfaith event at the Samuelson Chapel at California Lutheran University at 7 p.m. entitled Courage for the Common Good. On Saturday, March 14th, there'll be an interfaith unity walk with music, service projects, and family activities at Rancho Tapo Community Park in Simi Valley, starting at 10 a.m. And over that weekend of March 13th through the 15th, we're inviting faith communities to focus the theme of love your neighbor in their worship and religious education for children. We've been getting great enthusiasm from this campaign from a diverse cross-section of faith communities who share the conviction that reaffirming this value of loving our neighbor is timely in today's social climate. We hope you will consider participating by attending the interfaith event at CLU and participating in your own faith communities. We're also requesting your consideration of a proclamation from the city recognizing the Conejo Valley Interfaith Association and Love Your Neighbor Weekend. This request has been submitted to the city clerk's office along with my contact information, and I have some flyers to leave here for each of you. On behalf of the Interfaith Association, thank you and blessings to each of you.
Thank you, Mr. Lubka. And that concludes our public comments for the evening. And we have no follow-up from our city manager. So let us move on to the consent calendar. Do I have a motion to approve?
I move to
Councilmember
approve.
McCoy.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
All right. Put the vote up, please. Here we are.
Councilmember Bill de la Peña, can I have your verbal vote, please?
Verbal vote on the
Yes,
consent calendar.
Thank you.
All right.
That motion passes 5-0.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Our first item on the agenda is a public hearing. If you would announce that, Ms. McGuire.
Yes, hearing advertised as required by law is open to consider agenda item 8A regarding the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Draft 2020 through 2024 Regional Consolidated Plan and analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. A speaker card is available for those wishing to address the City Council regarding the public hearing. At this time, there are no speakers.
All right, thank you very much. And we have Ms. Marjan Bezadi, our Community Development Operations Manager, to give us the report this evening. Good evening, Ms. Bezadi.
Good evening, Mayor and council members and all in attendance. Tonight, staff is presenting 2 draft documents which are contained, actually, I have it here in this book, Riveting Read, that I'm holding, and Ventura County Regional 5-year consolidated plan and the con plan, as we call it sometimes, and analysis of impediments to fair housing choice are contained in this book. The con plan describes resources and unmet low-income resident needs. And the AI describes the region's progress in ensuring that all residents are provided with equal access to housing opportunities. County of Ventura selected the Cloudburst Group to assist in preparing these documents. Susan Walsh from Cloudburst to my left, and Community Development Analyst Lynn Ashida, also to my left, are here tonight to answer any questions. Susan has been the HUD consultant for the City of Ventura for the past couple of years. So to give you a little overview, every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, requires each grantee, such as City of Thousand Oaks, to prepare a long-range strategic plan for the future of HUD funds. City of Thousand Oaks has collaborated with the County of Ventura and the 4 other cities to produce these reports. The overarching purpose of tonight's hearing is to receive input on local priorities for HUD funding over the next 5 years and on recommendations regarding how to deal with the impediments on fair housing choice. No action is required tonight by council. The draft con plan and AI are a product of Cloudburst collecting and analyzing data and community needs and market housing conditions throughout the county. Community participation was a key component in developing these documents. Cloudburst conducted 6 regional community workshops and 6 stakeholder meetings. Approximately 800 Ventura County residents responded to stakeholder surveys. And Cloudburst also conducted 3 regional focus group meetings on housing, community services, and homelessness. So the first document, which is the con plan, is a 5-year framework developed to identify local needs for federal funds. It creates accountability for HUD expenditures and fosters consistency among grantees. So the collaboration produced an overview of the regional housing needs and service-related resources. The con plan has 3 main parts: 1, needs assessment, market analysis, and strategic plan, which I will discuss in the following slides. It's projected that $46.6 million for HUD-funded programs will be coming to the Ventura County region in the next 5 years. In the first and second parts, which are the needs assessment and market analysis reports, the con plan talks about 15 priorities across the county, priority needs rather. It should be noted that the collaboration with other local governments will not constrain each grantee's ability to independently decide how future CDBG funds will be used. For Thousand Oaks, 7 priorities are considered high and 8 considered low priority. On this slide, please notice the 7 high priority needs for Thousand Oaks based on public input. And these are identified as the 8 lower priorities for Thousand Oaks, also based on public input. So from the 15 regional priority needs, these 6 regional goals were established. Jurisdictions are not obligated to fund all needs, but goals 1, 3, 4, and 6, which are highlighted and underlined, are of particular importance to Thousand Oaks. On this slide, which is also in Table 1 of your staff report, is the core of the con plan. It's estimated that about $3 million in CDBG funds will be coming to Thousand Oaks in the next 5 years. Staff has broken down the CDBG funds to be allocated on these 4 goals, which are discussed in the strategic plan. Goal number 1 is creating and preserving 200 multifamily and 50 single-family affordable housing units. Goal 3 is increasing access to health, wellness, and other public services to 6,000 city residents. Goal 4 is homeless prevention services to 30 Thousand Oaks residents. And finally, Goal 6 is covering the city's administrative cost to run a CDBG program, which includes making sure the city complies with the numerous federal HUD regulations and fair housing. Of course, allocating CDBG funds will depend on the availability of HUD resources at the local level, and the final decision is made by the City Council on May 12th. Okay. The second document, the Analysis of Impediment to Fair Housing Choice, or AI, is another HUD-required report that is conducted every 5 years. The intent of this report is to help HUD grantees foster an environment where equal access to housing opportunities is treated as a fundamental right. The AI report analyzes conditions in the private market and the public sector that may limit the range of housing choices or hinder a person's access to housing. In this AI, 14 regional impediments were identified within 4 categories that are shown on the slide, and recommended actions for the regions to improve the housing environment. These recommendations start on page 123 of the AI document. City staff has analyzed these recommendations with the county and the other jurisdictions to identify potential options that as a region we might implement to enhance our efforts to support fair housing. Currently, the city partners with the County of Ventura and the Housing Rights Center of Thousand Oaks on a fair housing counseling program that offers residents free support and information via phone and online. The AI report is basically informational in nature and doesn't limit the city from future independent decisions by City Council on the allocation of CDBG funds. Now I'm going to talk about a little bit about the public review and the timeline associated with these documents. From now until April 24th, the draft documents will be available for public review at the County of Ventura and at all 10 city halls at the county, in the county. In Thousand Oaks, the public can review paper copies in the Community Development Department at the counter, and at both the Main and the Newbury Park branch libraries. Also, the city website has a link to the county webpage to view both documents. All public comments can be made directly to the County of Ventura executive offices. The County of Ventura, as the lead entity, will submit final documents to HUD after the public review period and final approvals by the county and all the 5 jurisdictions. Ventura County Board of Supervisors will be holding a final public hearing for adoption on May 5th, 2020, and Thousand Oaks City Council final public hearing is scheduled for May 12th, followed by HUD submission deadline on May 15th. So tonight, staff is asking you to consider these reports and receive public comments regarding the draft documents only. And as mentioned before, no action by council is required. This is the end of staff presentation. Staff and consultant Susan Walsh are available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bejan. Any questions for Ms. Bejan? Comments, discussion? Councilmember Engler.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, on our allocation of funding, we have roughly $3 million of allocation coming. I agree 100% with allocating probably 2/3 of that to keeping people in their existing homes, doing rehab. It's much cheaper, much more cost-effective, I think, to do that. I just wanted to get your input on that. Is there a better way to use those funds for keeping people from homelessness, or is there any other way to go about it?
I'm going to let my colleagues answer that.
We are focusing for the next 5 years on housing rehabilitation with CDBG funds. CDBG funds can be kind of complicated in all the federal regulations, and the federal funds used for the multifamily units gets us a lot of units for the dollars that are spent specifically at the site. And so we're focusing on single family and multifamily. And these are all to low-income Thousand Oaks tenants.
Are you able to bring some of those funds to some of the nonprofits that are involved? One that jumps into mind is the Habitat for Humanity, some of those well-established nonprofits.
So for the past several years, we have funded with CDBG funds to Habitat for Humanity on the mobile home parks and to the SAFE for the mobile home park rehab. We also funded with many mansions and the Area Housing Authority for the multifamily units.
And just an aside, I noticed as I was reading through the document in the problem areas, I noticed that Thousand Oaks, we had HUD come in and do some spot checks on housing, and unlike one of our neighboring county cities, Thousand Oaks was 100% compliant, which is very good. I'm happy to announce that to everybody, that our renters, our people who are renting to our citizens are following the law, which is great.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Engler, any other comments? I did read through this rather voluminous report. Thank you, Ms. Bejan, by the way. Good report. And, of course, as you say, it'll come back to us in May. This is just a draft, so there's really no action necessary tonight. But there is $3 million at stake over the next 5 years, so we certainly want to be a participant in this. It did have some interesting points that I'd like to reiterate, are some of the things that the council has been grappling with over the last couple of years. One of the things it's stated, which is fairly obvious, I think, to everybody at this point, that there's a high need in the city of Thousand Oaks for rental housing. And it went on to say that affordable housing opportunities for homeowners and renters must be created in our city. And if you look at some of the statistics, we have the highest average rent of any city in the county, $2,893 a month, which needs a $98,000 income to support that kind of rent. We also have the highest cost for home ownership. Our median price of a house is $731,000. So you can see where housing is definitely an issue here in the city of Thousand Oaks. It also goes on to make the point that about our population, our aging population. The median age in Ventura County is 37. The median age in Thousand Oaks is 43. We have the oldest median age of any city in the county, and 20% of our population are over 65. So, and the report does go on to say Thousand Oaks needs to explore strategies and approaches to attract younger residents, which I think we've all been talking about now for quite some time. But it's interesting to see this in a HUD report in black and white. And I definitely have to agree with that, considering we also have the most residential care facilities of any city in Ventura County with 64, which again is supporting our senior population, which we have to do, don't get me wrong, but we also have to bring some young people into the city. Which brings me to a point about, this report makes about the economy in Ventura County, which is relatively flat right now. Low-paying jobs are increasing, high-paying jobs are decreasing. And the reason for that is, at least according to the report, is housing. Because employers cannot recruit and retain people here in Ventura County and in Thousand Oaks because of the high cost of housing. So again, this all fits together, and it all makes the case that where we have to explore some housing opportunities. And in doing so, entry-level housing, it reduced the cost of housing. If we have a little bit more, the supply goes up, the demand hopefully goes down, and it's a lot cheaper to work infrastructure-wise with entry-level housing. So I guess what I'm getting at, and I'm not trying to be too long-winded here, but what this council is trying to do is create a path to prosperity for its residents. Because as I've stated before, there's kind of an economic wall built around the city because of these high housing costs. So how do we get a young person started in the city? How does someone like myself start out in an apartment and then move up to a smaller house and move up to a larger house? We have to create that path to prosperity, because all these baby boomers with all these expensive homes have to have somebody to sell them to. And they're not going to sell them to another baby boomer. So we have got to be able to create this path. And that means bringing in young people and creating housing opportunities and creating jobs like we're trying to do with our biotech hub. That's another key to this whole thing. So anyway, interesting report. And I think it highlighted some of the issues, as I mentioned, that we're grappling with the city. And I enjoyed reading it, sort of. It was a little long, but it was good. So thank you for that, and there's no need to vote, actually, because it's going to come back to us in May. So,
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Oh, Mr. Jones, absolutely. Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate your remarks, and I just wonder, does the HUD contemplate an optimum population for the city of Thousand Oaks? That is, in creating the affordable housing, if we're able to do that, does it anticipate that, if necessary, older housing would have to be eliminated and new apartments put in their place? What I'm getting at is, do they foresee that we should have a higher population, or does this have any implication for the total population of Thousand Oaks?
Yes, I don't think this has any implication on that. HUD leaves those decisions to the local jurisdiction, as long as they're complying by federal law, fair housing laws and things like that. So this document doesn't dictate any kind of population or housing structure.
So the implication then is that somehow we transform existing housing, or somehow build new units that would be affordable to the different ranges of extremely low, moderate, and so forth. I mean, it doesn't seem like that is a task that is an easy one. Given that we all know that the price of housing depends on the law of supply and demand, and so we're really, I think, in a difficult place, because this has become a desirable place to live, and I'm just wondering if we're going to have the ability to do that, to provide affordable housing.
As Ms. Walsh mentioned, the HUD analysis does not in and of itself require a certain amount of housing. It recognizes that in our case, Thousand Oaks has high housing prices and additional supply is appropriate. Where we get into the specific numbers that you're referencing, council member, is actually going to be next on our agenda, where we talk about state requirements for housing as part of our housing study session. And there, the state does break down targets by income categories, and then we have specific goals. And I won't go too far down this track, but how we provide those units in a broad sense is really up to the jurisdiction, whether it's greenfield development or it's redevelopment of existing sites at a higher density.
Yeah, well, I just would wind up by saying I appreciate HUD's goals here, and I think a lot of us share those goals of trying to get new young people that can afford to live here. I do think our ability is limited in doing that, but I think it's a noble endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Yeah, as staff said, I think this report simply lays out the situation as it is. It's up to us as council members to look at what those implications might be and set policy accordingly. But I don't think this document dictates in any way, how we're supposed to handle the housing situation or not, for that matter. It just lays out the situation as it is now. All right, well, with that, I think we can move on to our next agenda item. And thank you for that report. And this is going to be a department report. And we're going to talk about housing. So maybe that topic will come up. We're going to have Veronica Tam, who is owner and principal of Veronica Tam and Associates, to give us the report. And Michael Forbes, also our Deputy Community Development Director, will be involved as well. Evening to you both.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Throughout the general plan update process, we will be bringing to the City Council study sessions to talk about issues that are relevant to where we are in the update process at any point in time. So as you pointed out, the topic that we're bringing forward this evening is housing. This was one of the primary topics that we heard brought up throughout the public outreach that we've conducted so far on the general plan update, and it will be one of the key issues that the community and the council tackles going forward through the update process. So we're hoping that tonight's presentation and conversation can serve as the foundation for the City Council as we consider housing issues going forward. Tonight we have with us our consultant who will be preparing our housing element portion of the general plan update, Veronica Tam. She's a recognized expert throughout the state in housing issues, and we're very fortunate to have her with us and to have her on our general plan team. So with that, I will hand it over to Ms. Tam.
Great, thank you. A lot of the statistics the mayor just cited earlier actually are very relevant to the presentation tonight. What I'd like to do tonight is to give you an overview of the state of housing in the city of Thousand Oaks, and also how it relates to the housing element update, and also some of the policy directions from the state regarding mouse is not. Oh, right. Mouse is hard to.
Oh, it's over.
Ah.
That one. There we go.
But it's not.
Showing it actually on this one.
Oh, okay. So how do I?
Just use the.
I will just do the page. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, fair.
This is what's on the screen.
it's not moving. Right. Yeah, because it's not. No, sorry.
We are working on our PowerPoint, which we shall have momentarily. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 5-minute break here until we get our PowerPoint in order. So let us do that, and we'll be back shortly.
Is it going to be okay? And then how it relates to the housing element update, and particularly alert you to some of the new legislations governing the housing element update. A lot of the statistics you're probably familiar with. The city's housing stock is heavily leaned towards the single-family neighborhoods, single-family use. About 78-79% of your housing units currently in your housing stock are single-family attached or detached units. The rest of them are multifamily units. In terms of housing growth, in between 2000 and 2010, the city is probably like a moderate growth amount some of your communities in Ventura County. But in the last 10 years or so, the city has become a relatively small, has seen relatively limited growth, only 1.2%. Between 2010 to 2019. That's part of the reason why we are seeing a shortage of housing recently, and then the high cost of housing. When we look at housing from the perspective of housing policy planning and programs, the state actually establishes 5 income groups: extremely low income, people who make between 0 to 30% of the area median income; very low income, people who make no more than 50% of the area median income; low income up to 80%; moderate income up to 120%; and above moderate income, it's anybody who's above 120%. Just a note that the document that you saw, that was presented to you before, is from HUD. It covers only primarily people up to 80% of the median income. It doesn't cover people who are who has higher income than that. That's because the federal regulations. Another income group that we usually like to look at is the missing middle, the workforce housing, people who are have good jobs, but still have issues finding housing. Those are typically people we looked at households who make up to 150% of the county median income. We call them middle income. In some other counties, maybe in Northern California, this can go all the way up to 180% and still considered to be an income group that needs some attention in terms of the housing needs. Translating that income category to dollar sign, HUD and the state does income surveys annually, and they establish some kind of income limits on a county level, and the income limits is adjusted on household size, by household size. For Ventura County, you are a higher income county, so when you look at your median income, they basically looked at it from a household of 4 persons. It's at $97,800. $97,800 is still considered just a median income household in Ventura County, and if you compare that to LA County, it's much higher than LA County. LA County's median household income is just about $74,000. A lot of the housing programs and eligibility would look at these income limits for as a guidance in terms of who would qualify for assistance. And looking at your income distribution, the majority of this data is actually from HUD and is related to the document that you were presented earlier. The majority of your households are people who make moderate or above income. About 70% of your population makes that are not considered low and lower income. That is, again, a higher percentage than Ventura County as a whole, because you are a higher income community as a whole compared to the rest of Ventura County. A lot of times when you look at household income and their housing choices, they're limited particularly for very low, and extremely low income households, then primarily limited to rental housing. If you look at the income distribution by tenure, extremely low income, the majority of them are renters. So the percentage of home ownership increases as the income increases. A lot of the people who are owners in the extremely low and low income households are actually those who are seniors who've lived in this community for a long time. They own a house that they're rich in asset, but they're limited in income. And those are also a lot of the seniors who have issues with maintaining the homes, maybe needing assistance with housing rehabilitation because they have limited income, they're rich in asset, but may be limited in income. When we look at the median home price in the city of Thousand Oaks, your home prices have somehow gone down a little bit over the last couple of years, but it's still among the highest in Ventura County. Currently, November 19, the median home price was $719,000. Now, looking at your rent, it is high, just about, for a 2-bedroom apartment, you're looking at an average rent of about 2,300 units. And there are not a whole lot of single-family homes that are small that are available for rent. A lot of the larger single-family homes are primarily 3 and 4 bedrooms, and they are at least $3,200 dollars a month in rents. When you compare the housing cost with how much people make, this chart shows you that in order to afford a $2,200, that's like a 2-bedroom apartment in Thousand Oaks, you have to make $106,000. That is higher than the median household income in Thousand Oaks. So you can be making the median income in Thousand Oaks, but cannot afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Thousand Oaks. Now, if you want to buy a home that is $730,000, that's actually the current price of the home, you have to make $144,000. Majority of the people who are teachers firefighters and even civil engineers, they're not making that type of income. And when you look at people who are low income, who are like licensed nurses, we're not talking about registered nurses, but like healthcare technicians, they're not making anywhere near $144,000 a year in order to afford homeownership in the city of Thousand Oaks. Just out of curiosity, I looked at some of the new construction homes that are available for sale. The majority of them average about $1.5 to $1.6 million. And in order to afford that, you would need $315,000 of income annually. And pretty much you will need to have an attorney and a physician in that kind of household in order to be able to afford a brand new home that's being built and offered in Thousand Oaks today. And just also to make a comparison, a lot of the college grads, if they just have a college degree, they're probably making an average about $40,000, nowhere near what they would need to be able to live among families or near the parents if they want to stay in Thousand Oaks. They would not be able to afford to rent in Thousand Oaks. Having said that, we also want to look at something called cost burden. How high the cost of housing is relative to income, how much people can afford to spend on housing. Typically, we look at, from a housing policy planning standpoint, we're looking at 30 to 35% of your household income to spend on housing. If you spend within that, you're spending an affordable housing cost. But if you're spending more than that, your housing cost is considered burdening. A lot of times when we go to a mortgage lender, they would use 38 to 40%. That is really even above what is considered affordable housing, but typically that's what a lender would use, 40% of your income. If you look at, based on the extremely low income, very low and moderate income households in your community, particularly vulnerable are the extremely low and very low income households. These people are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, so anything that happens to the income in the event of a loss of income, loss of employment, or an unexpected expenses such as healthcare, it would render these people at risk of becoming homeless. The city of Thousand Oaks does try to pursue affordable housing efforts. As we also heard earlier, it's very expensive to create affordable housing at the market rate. And so the city does have some programs, and you have the inclusionary ordinance, but your in lieu fee and linkage fee are currently set at 0, so you're not collecting money at this point to help finance affordable housing. You do create affordable housing projects that have Measure E allocations. The city also are very big in preserving and what you currently have, precisely because it's so expensive to create new affordable housing. It's even more important that you preserve and improve what you currently have. So the city does have programs to pursue acquisition rehab of multifamily housing. You've partnered with many mentions and housing authority to do affordable rental housing that way. You do provide assistance, utility assistance to seniors and disabled. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the seniors are actually lower income. They're assets rich, but they can be income limited. And we all know utility rates can go up really high during the summertime or during winter times. And sometimes seniors would have, and persons with disabilities would have issues making even the utility payments. So the city does have a program to help them out a little bit. And the city also participates in the continuum of care strategy with the county to address homelessness and primarily providing fundings for nonprofits to provide homeless services and supportive housing throughout the county. The next segment I want to move on to is about the housing element update and the housing element requirements. Under state law, the housing element is one of the 8 mandatory elements of the general plan. The housing element is much more heavily regulated compared to other elements of the general plan. But essentially, it wants you to provide a variety of housing types for all income groups, pointing back into the mayor's earlier comments about having to have a range of options that people can move up to, and to attract also younger people or retain the younger population. And so the state law says you have to provide a variety of housing types for all income groups. Recognizing that market pretty much takes care of people who are above moderate income or high income, then there needs to be assistance to provide housing for people who are low and moderate income. Your obligation is not so much as that you have to build the housing, the affordable housing, because you have limited resources, but your major obligation is to make sure that your regulations help to facilitate the development of housing for low and moderate income households. Also, another requirement is to preserve and improve existing housing stock, particularly housing stock that is affordable, so that you continue to maintain an affordable inventory. And lastly, also related to the report that you heard earlier, is to promote fair housing. Once you have provided the housing opportunities, you have to make sure that there's equal access to housing. A key component of the housing element is the concept of regional housing needs allocation. This is the amount of growth that each jurisdiction is responsible for pursuant to state law. The state projects how much growth is going to occur in the entire state and divvy up that growth by regions, and each region is responsible for allocating that growth to its member jurisdictions. For the Ventura County, the city of Thousand Oaks, we belonged into Southern California Association of Governments. SCAG has been allocated a very large regional housing needs allocation number for the 8-year planning period of the housing element, 1.3 million units. And Ventura County get 24,000 units, which is only just about 1.8% of the entire 6-county region allocation, and the city of Thousand Oaks gets an allocation of 2,578 units. This number is only an estimated number, it's not the final number. We will not know the final number until probably closer to September and October this year. The regional housing needs allocation arena is divided into income categories: very low, about 28%, low income, about 19%, and moderate income, about 20%, and above moderate is about 32%. And if you remember earlier about the income distribution chart in the city of Thousand Oaks, you have over 60-something% that is above. That's moderate income and above. That's higher higher proportion than the county. What the regional housing needs allocation is doing is giving you a balance, moving you closer to the county level of the income distribution. What the regional housing needs allocation means is that as a jurisdiction, you must plan for the allocation of the number of units per RHNA, that you must have sites with adequate capacity and development standards and appropriate zoning in order to facilitate and encourage those units. We're talking about 30 units to the acre. That's codified in state law, that 30 units to the acre is considered adequate to facilitate and encourage lower income housing in Ventura County. Based on your RHNA allocation at the estimated RHNA allocation, you're talking about 1,208 units that are lower income. What we need to do in the housing element is identify vacant and underutilized properties with near-term development potential that can potentially facilitate and accommodate these housing units. Again, the city's obligation is not that you will build the units, you cannot function as a developer, but you need to make sure that your development process, your fees, your regulations are not constraining to housing development. Looking at your current general plan land use distribution, again, the majority of your residential land is zoned for low density and very low density. Your higher density residential land or medium density, it's about 6% of the overall land use distribution. So as part of the housing element, in order to meet the housing element law, and also in order to, and more importantly, to meet your local housing needs, is to make sure that you provide a variety of housing types, a diverse housing stock, that you can attract young professionals, young families, in order to have them coming to the community. A lot of the younger families are looking for housing types and amenities that may not be the large estate homes. They cannot afford those. So what would be the appropriate? Probably apartments, condos, townhomes. They may be more appropriate for some of the younger family to live in. It also allows seniors to downsize. A lot of seniors would not be able to afford or have the physical ability to maintain a very large home. So having the ability to move down to a smaller home would be advantageous or attractive to a lot of seniors to be able to age in place. We also want to be able to recruit employees to the community and make sure that residents can live and work in Thousand Oaks. The next couple of slides kind of go over some of the key policy direction from Sacramento in terms of governing housing production. The major direction is to make sure that jurisdictions remove constraints to development. Again, your application is not necessarily to build them, but you have to remove constraints to development, such as reducing fees, relaxing development standards, or making development standards objective, streamlining the processing of affordable housing and particularly housing in general, and again, having objective standards for site plan and design reviews. Expanding housing options is another policy direction. We have a lot of laws, bills recently dealing with accessory dwelling units, making sure that your community can accommodate that housing type, supportive housing for persons with disabilities, housing for the homeless, and expanding the density bonus in order to encourage 100% affordable housing projects in jurisdictions. The housing element, it's different from the rest of the general plan in that it is probably the most frequently litigated element of the general plan, but it also requires the review of a state agency for compliance with state law. No other elements of the general plan has that kind of review. The State Housing and Community Development Department, HCD, does the monitoring and review of housing element. With recent changes to state law, it gives them more power to monitor non-compliant jurisdictions and report them to the Attorney General for litigation. If you are in fact in a lawsuit situation and the court finds the city's housing element out of compliance, you can be fined up to $100,000 per month until you resolve the situation. The city of Huntington Beach is the first jurisdiction sued by the state based on new changes in state law, AB 72. But there have been a lot of other communities that are sued by nonprofits as well. The other consequence of not having an eligible housing, compliant housing element is eligibility for state funds. One really big one is SB2 grants. That functions as a block grant. You automatically qualifies for the funding if you have a compliant housing element. As long as you apply for it, you will get the funding if you have a compliant housing element. In the first round, the city received $310,000. It will continue on an annual basis. That funding will continue to be available. Housing trust funds and Cal Home funds, a lot of these fundings use housing element compliance as an eligibility or as a criteria for the ranking system. And so with that, I conclude my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Tam. Any part? Oh, Mr. Bowers would like to make a comment.
Just really quickly for the council and the community's benefit, thank you, Ms. Tam, for the great presentation. The purposes, as we mentioned at the outset of this item tonight, was to help set the stage for the council. We're in the process of a very significant general plan update, and there will be decisions moving forward as we move through this year that will become increasingly complex. And we felt it was important to have a discussion tonight on the broader issue of housing in order to give the council an opportunity to ask questions and get answers from one of the leading experts in the state.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. If I may, I would like to. I'll be right with you, Mr. Jones. I just wanted to make a comment. I appreciate your presentation very much, especially what you said about a variety of housing, a diverse housing stock. And considering the fact that our city is almost 50% single-family homes in low-density lots, and the other 45% is open space. And as this chart shows, we only have 0.8%, less than 1% of developable land here in the city. This ability to create diversity and variety in housing is in my mind, essential. And I think you make a very good point about young people and seniors. Young people, to get started and to get, to have a stepping stone, they need this variety of housing. They need an apartment or a condo to get established in a city, and it seems to me that that's particular stock is what we're lacking here in the city of Thousand Oaks, and all the statistics point to that. It worked 50 years ago when houses were $25,000, $30,000 a piece. That was entry-level housing, but it's not anymore because those same houses are now $750,000 a piece. So it seems to me that the writing is on the wall as far as attracting young people. And you made a good point about seniors, too. Seniors living in these big homes with pools and big lots and a lot of maintenance, they want to downsize. And they need a diversity in housing to be able to do that as well. But, of course, they're going to have someone to sell those homes to, which could be a problem down the road. However, I think you made some very good points and appreciate your report. And Mr. Jones, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to start by asking a question. When did the state get into implementing the theory that the economy ought to determine land use in a city?
Has been in place since the 1980s, but it does recognize that the city has no control over the market, and therefore the housing element law doesn't require you to function as a developer, so you wouldn't have the obligation to build the units, but you have to make sure that your policies and regulations that you have control over can accommodate the housing should the market calls for it.
Well, this theory that they have evidently been adopting and implementing, you say since the 1980s, has the effect of changing the original concept that a city had when it began to develop. And the criteria that were used then had to do with creating a very lovely environment for the people to live in. And now it seems, and I'm not making a value judgment on it, but it seems that idea has changed. And we're more concerned about different levels of income being accommodated in a certain geographical area rather than a balance of parks and schools and playgrounds and open space, et cetera. And I'm beginning to wonder although I think most of us admire the open space, let's take that element for a moment, that we've created through the COSCA, this partnership between the city and the Connecticut Park District. But it seems to me if this idea of having the best housing stock to accommodate a whole range of people, and we keep getting more numbers. It's 2,500 this year, and I understand it was originally like 7,000, and we got it down to 2,500. Did you say that, Mr. Mann? I mean, it seems to me the logical extension and conclusion of this process every year is that we're going to have to go into the open space. We're going to have to change ratios, et cetera, of what is where in our city. And it seems to me that this economic standard, and it sounds like I'm against, entry-level people. I'm not. I was one myself here many years ago. But it seems to me if you do this over many, many years, you're going to change the whole character of a city. And I wonder if did they think about the ultimate goal? If they keep asking us for 7,000 or 5,000 or more units a year, is there an end to it somewhere? Or are we supposed to just keep raising the population all the time? Do you see what I'm getting at? I think that there is no logical conclusion to this.
Well, I think one thing is the state has changed. The state of California, the character of the state has changed. As long as the state continues to grow, the state law says each jurisdiction has that responsibility to help share the burden of the growth. Now, it doesn't change the fact that it will be difficult land use decisions that the city would have to make in the upcoming months when you're doing your general plan update. But until there is a different a change in state law, this is the time of the framework that we will be working with.
Well, I see some flaws in this theory, if you don't mind my saying that. Thank you.
Mr. Jones, may I say something? The model that you helped create back in 1970 for the city, and you had a big hand in that, I know you did, has worked well over the years. And I think, as I stated, with about half the city in single-family homes and about another 45% on open space, I don't see that changing. I don't see that changing at all. We have less than 1% of developable land here in the city, less than 1%. And we have identified opportunity sites, small though they may be, along the 101 corridor, not in existing neighborhoods, not in open space, anything like that. So this notion that somehow we would disturb the balance of the city, I don't think is valid. We've identified opportunity sites where some housing could go, and but I think the overall model that you helped create will remain. Well, it's not whether it's land that's available, and if you look at the chart that was presented to us tonight, 0.8% of developable land left in the city. That's a very, very small portion. That's not North Ranch, that's not Lynn Ranch, that's not First Neighborhood, that's not Lang Ranch, that's not Dos Vientos. Those are all established neighborhoods. That's not our 15,000 acres of open space surrounding the city. That's very small, what I'll call opportunity sites along the 101 corridor. So, like I said, I think this notion of somehow disrupting the balance that you helped create 50 years ago is just not going to play out.
But I just don't understand, since we were originally going to be asked to create 7,000 units this year, and somehow we got it down to 2,500.
Yeah, I think that's what the state ultimately...
Year after year after year, I mean, what are we talking about, the ultimate population? of Thousand Oaks, and what implication does that have for traffic? You know, cars.
Well, these are all issues we'll have to tackle, but I can tell you we're the slowest growing city in Ventura County. We have the lowest population per square mile of any city in Ventura County, and we're 55 square miles in our city. And as I said, just not to be repetitive, but the developable land that we have is so small that, you know, I don't think it's going to affect that balance that you just talked about.
What you say is very logical, and I hope that works out. But as long as Sacramento is deciding these things, you know, what is to prevent them from saying, well, we think you need 10,000 more people or 20,000, you know? The open space, you know, is not inviolate. You know, what you create, you can uncreate. And I
would agree with it, but
I'm just worried about the long-term environment.
Sure, I understand. But I haven't seen anything out of Sacramento that would dictate to us that we are to start invading our open space or anything like that.
Well, as I say, I hope you're right.
Just
Mr. Powers like to comment.
One quick point, because I heard a couple times a number mentioned. It's important, the regional housing needs assessment number that will be finalized this fall. We anticipate ours being around 2,600 units. That's over an 8-year cycle. And so it's just important to remember these are not annual requirements in terms of those numbers. And so when you equate it out, it's roughly 300, 350 units of housing per year over that period.
Yeah, and by any measure, we've been an extremely slow growth city. I think staff recently reported over the last 5 years we've built, was it 400 units, I think? About 80 units a year we've averaged, which is by no means, I would call any kind of fast growth. But be that as it may, let me get to Councilmember Engler.
Thank you for the presentation, Ms. Tam. A couple of questions, I think, kind of technical questions. In your presentation, you talked about we're required to find sites that will sustain appropriate density and also have development standards. Can you go a little more into that description as the law states?
As an urban community, it's an urbanized community in Ventura County, the state law essentially established a threshold of 30 units to the acre as being a density that is adequate to facilitate and encourage housing for lower income households. So if your land use designation can cover, let's say, from 20 to 30 units to the acre, that zoning district is considered to be adequate to facilitate and encourage. But then you also need to look at your development standards, your parking, your height limits, and your open space requirements. All these would have to work out so that development can occur within that kind of zoning district. And now that we have the zoning district, we need to identify sites that are either vacant or underutilized that could potentially have a project on there in the next 8 years. And that's what we need to do as part of the housing element to demonstrate that you have adequate sites for lower income for the RENA.
In terms of, this tags a little bit along with Councilmember Jones, in terms of our open space, we have thousands of acres of open space. Most of that has been transferred to another entity, COSCA. Mm-hmm. Does that protect that land, or is that seen as underutilized or vacant?
And the state doesn't really dictate where you want to put the housing. So there is absolutely no requirement and no risk at all for the state to say that you need to utilize your open space to meet the regional housing needs allocation. How you can figure it out within your land use policy is entirely up to the jurisdiction.
Thank you. Then a couple of other questions. SB 330 talks about a less intensive use. Is that down zoning if we were to down zone an area from, say, a multiple residence area to a single-family residence area? Is that the type of thing they're talking about?
Right. If you're down zoning in one area, you need to up zone in another area to have a no net loss balance in your community, and that is a recent state law. Yes.
Now, in AB 101, it talks about a by right use. If we designate an area, do we then relinquish some of our control over how that is developed, or is it a by right use that the AB 101 is going to have us go with?
By right means by right in terms of use and density. It doesn't prevent the jurisdictions from having site plan review and design review, as long as you have objective standards and guidelines for your review, and that you do not require developer to lower the density as part of that site plan and design review, so as long as they comply with your zoning code and your general plan.
And maybe I'll editorialize a little bit. I think with the state is requesting very strongly, and they do have the, in AB 101, I believe it is, they have the stick aspect of it. You mentioned $100,000 per month for non-compliance, which is $1 million a year, which is a lot of money. But the state is also trying to get us to address a statewide issue. I think we have some opportunities maybe to do that in our community. I think we need to seize on the opportunity and not look at the state as
yeah, absolutely. Then there are a lot of bills that talks about regulations and development standards and policies, but there are also a lot of bills that actually generate funding. SB2 is one, AB 101 is another one that also has a planning grant that attached to 101 as well. There are a lot of other housing for the disabled, housing for the homeless, and also general affordable housing funds. The state law has actually provided for additional funding opportunities for jurisdictions to address the housing issues.
Thank you, Ms. Tam. Mayor Pro Tem Bill de la Pena.
Thank you, Mayor Adam. Good evening, Ms. Tam. I have a few questions. Since you're the expert here tonight, we don't have, as Mayor Adam mentioned, a lot of land left to be developed in the city of Thousand Oaks. It's about, I tried to do very simple math. We have about land left for about, well, what is it? Just barely 300 acres. If we're just very simplistic, not considering topography and other restrictions, that is really not a lot. And what happens with all of the restrictions now from Sacramento and the directions from Sacramento, once we have really covered everything there is to cover in Thousand Oaks with housing, what happens after that? When we are being told in the next housing cycle to add another few thousand units, yet we are not able to do that.
Well, I don't necessarily want to predict what's going to happen the next cycle, because when we did this current cycle, the fifth cycle, we didn't know what happened with the next cycle. But on the other hand, if you have reached a certain point in terms of your housing and your maturity in your community, maybe at that point the overall growth in the state is going to slow down, and maybe there is a recession. So I can't really predict that how the state is going to dictate its policy. But if you look at the majority of the housing growth with the 1.3 million units, only 1.8% went to Ventura County. The majority of the housing actually goes to the Inland Empire, to LA County, to Orange County. So it's recognizing the fact that Ventura County has its limitations in terms of its natural resources and land, and also the fact that you have not been the fastest growing community, and there are transportation issues, access issues. So I think, I can't predict what's going to happen with state law and what's going to happen with the economy and what's going to happen with how much growth is going to come to California. But if you look at the magnitude, you're only 1.8% of the overall region's growth. So that is a recognition in that regard.
Well, it's good to hear that, but for us residents in Little Thousand Oaks and surrounded by our neighbors, it's a large number when we hear 2,500 units this cycle and then several thousand more down the road. So obviously we don't want to change the character of our city, and we can take it to the max, but there is a ceiling somewhere. And I'm just wondering how realistic it will be with policies, more bills in the coming down the pike, how realistic that it will be to oblige.
Yeah, I think what the mayor mentioned earlier is an important consideration. Is look at where growth is appropriate in your community. There are areas that are opportunity sites, that are catalyst areas that can generate or create neighborhoods or little villages that are more appropriate housing types for the younger generation that don't like to drive to everything. They like to have walk to the coffee place. They can, there are opportunities within the city of Thousand Oaks to have these kind of villages or activity centers. I think that's something that we can look as part of the general plan that we should be looking at. Again, what's going to happen at the state, I cannot predict, but within the framework that we're working with, there are opportunities within city that would respect the character of the community and yet provide opportunities for the younger generation.
Thank you. And as I'm pondering this, and looking at the numbers and available land, I'm wondering, is the city of Thousand Oaks better off just having concentrated density in certain areas, like the villages you mentioned, or do we keep buildings at 2 stories, no more than 3 stories, but spread it out throughout the city?
I think I don't want to go into that direction, because I think that kind of land use discussion involves a much bigger, a deeper discussion, and I don't want to, move ahead and talk about that without a bigger and deeper discussions. But how the community wants to do it is entirely up to you. What you feel is appropriate for the community is entirely up to you.
So technically, as we're reaching out to our residents for input, for feedback, normally we hear they like to see a height limit, nothing excessive, nothing as tall as this building, for example. And so that is something that cities, not only like Thousand Oaks are taking into consideration. But with all of these demands coming from Sacramento and taking away local control, is that still something, height limits, that we cities can enforce?
You can still enforce height limit, but you need to also respect the 30 units to the acre. Can you accommodate a building that has 30 units to the acre and all the development standards that you like to put in place? So it's like a jigsaw puzzle that you're going to have to work through as part of the general plan update. You can still have height limits, but it has to be feasible.
And sometimes or oftentimes we'll have to accommodate the 35% density bonus.
Correct. And
that will lead to 4- and 5-story buildings.
Not necessarily, but it depends on your development standards.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Jones.
Yeah, I do want to make a couple more remarks, but I wondered about your figure of 48,000. Is that the city or is that the entire Conejo Valley? 48,000 units, you said, dwelling units.
Currently.
But is that the city or is that the whole valley? My understanding that it's closer to 40,000 within the city limits, and that 48,000 might include Lynn Ranch, Casa Conejo, Rolling Oaks?
No, that's based on the census boundaries of the city, the political boundaries for the city, I think.
So it's not the whole Conejo Valley? The reason I ask is when we planned, the mayor made an allusion to the planning we did in the early 70s. We planned for the whole valley, thinking that these areas would want to annex, but some of them never did. And I'm just wondering if that is an accurate figure. I mean, you can just check that. I don't know how long we want to continue this discussion, Mr. Mayor, but I really am concerned, especially by the phrase you used, the state wants to remove constraints to development. That's sounds ominous to me, you know. Constraints to development might be open space, it might be zoning, it might be, you know, a lot of things that we think makes this a very lovely community. And you know, just to talk about political theory for a moment, the idea of the state prescribing in some detail what cities can do is really a departure, in my opinion, from the whole theory of cities. We all know that cities and counties and special districts were not provided for in the United States Constitution. They were created by states. And the theory was that the states are not close enough. They're too far a distant from all the cities and so forth, some 500 that we have in California, to actually do a good job. And the theory was that I thought we've always had, that locally elected people were in a better position to make those types of decisions. And this growing idea of dictation from Sacramento to city development, especially as it applies to all aspects of housing, carries the inference in my mind that if you people in Sacramento think they know better than 500 some elected city councils as far as the planning and the very day-to-day life details of a city, I don't see how they can know that. And to me, this idea of one size fits all that they seem to be saying, just allocating numbers on the basis of a certain number of cities and dividing it, and so you get this much and somebody else gets that much. And I don't think there's any logical conclusion. I would like to touch on what Councilmember De La Pena said. There is no ceiling on this that I can see. I mean, I'm not going to be around to see us reach 200,000, but it seems to me that there is no necessary stop to this idea of continually planning for this based on the economy. And I believe at some point, if this continues, we ought to send a delegation to Sacramento. And I don't know, Mr. City Manager, if this has happened before, but I believe that they're taking away local control, and for now it might be able to accommodate the little bit of raw land we have, but I don't know what happens when this planning may reach a further stage, which I wouldn't want to see. Thank you. End of sermon.
Yeah.
Mr. Powers?
I just wanted to quickly respond to a couple of points from Councilmember Jones. Yes, we have been very much on the record consistently with our positions in Sacramento advocating for local control. And we have probably one of the most thorough paper trails on that of any city in California. what I think is important for the entire council is the reason we're having this discussion here tonight is the council later, early this summer, will be having a discussion around your land use alternative. That's the next sort of really big piece of the general plan process. And the reason that staff brought the item to you last winter to do a comprehensive update was specifically to maintain local control. For the council to be in the driver's seat as the land use authority and determining within the confines of the state, and yes, there are numbers attached and other things like that, but the council as the land use authority should be the one that dictates where that goes from a zoning perspective, from a land use perspective. And so that's the dialogue that's been happening out in the community, but moreover, that's the question that's going to be in front of the council as you look at a map and you look at that unit count of 2,600 units, where do you want to place that? And the council controls that. And, you know, the one thing that we've talked about pretty consistently when we've heard from our outreach efforts, there's things that we all cherish and want to preserve, open space being chiefly among them. And the character of our single-family neighborhoods being high on that list as well. So the good news for the city council is you are in the driver's seat. That is the reason doing a comprehensive general plan update gives you the most power and tools to chart the community's course forward.
Thank you, Mr. Power. Ms. Noonan?
Thank you. I was actually going to talk a little bit about what Mr. Power said, but the only other thing I wanted to add is when we're talking about various housing cycles, every time we go through a housing cycle, we don't know where we're going to go from there. I think the last housing cycle, how many units were we allocated the last housing cycle, Mark?
200 and something.
Yeah, it was 200 and something. So we really don't know what's going to happen the next housing cycle and so on and so forth. So that's something to consider at this point. Right now, we are working on a comprehensive general plan update that's going to last for at least 25, 30 years, if not more, given the fact that the one that we originally did wasn't touched for 50 years. We must meet our RENA obligations. We must identify housing locations for at least this cycle. We're going to try to work on what we would predict as 3 cycles, which is almost a built-out type of a concept. But we really don't know what's going to happen, as Ms. Tam said, what the economy is going to dictate, population growth trends, and so on and so forth. So those are all going to factor into future housing cycles as well.
Thank you, Ms. Noonan. And as Ms. Tam mentioned about opportunity sites, we do have some opportunity sites in Thousand Oaks. They run along the 101 corridor. They're not involved with single-family home neighborhoods, and those could potentially be developed and, as you said, respect the character of the city at the same time. So I appreciate that. Councilmember Engler.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to tag along a little bit with Ms. Noonan as well. The state is handing down some regulations that we need to work with. That's the cards we're dealt. I'm not going to worry too much and crystal ball too much what's happening 8 years from now, because I don't think anybody can crystal ball that. Could it continue to accelerate? Probably could, or it could go back to the 200 we had last time. I know that I think it's AB or Senate Bill 330. It has a sunset in 2025, as well as a couple of the other regulations that have been sent down to us, sunset out in 2025. So to try and crystal ball what's going to happen, I think is an exercise in futility right now. I think we need to play the cards that we're dealt right now, address our RENA numbers, find those locations, and comply with the state so we can get our certification.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, certainly we have to follow state law. There's nothing we can do about that at the moment. But to piggyback on what Councilmember Jones said, it was the cities, the smaller cities of the state of California, which prevented one of the most disastrous bills from becoming law, SB 50 by Scott Wiener. And we had to fight tooth and nail in order to stop that bill from getting passed. And that is, he's not giving up. The author of the bill is not giving up. And so while we have the chance to still maintain the little control that we have to take the opportunity to identify opportunity sites, which we already have, and before it will become even worse. So yes, it is important to know what we cannot predict the future, certainly, but we have to figure out a way to signal to Sacramento that in 8 years from now, or even 25 years, I mean, this cannot continue to happen. New York cannot build its way out of the housing problem. I mean, look at the density in the urban areas in the state of New York, and the rent is even higher. So to think that we can build and build and build and the problems will be solved is just really not making any sense to me. But certainly with what we have here tonight, you are looking for direction from the council, and certainly we will give that to you.
Thank you. And we do have one speaker, and I just will say, and I appreciate all the comments, a good discussion, and that's what the reason for this agenda item was for tonight. But I agree that locally speaking, I think that all cities, including Thousand Oaks, know what to build, when to build, and where to build better than the state of California. So I think we can work with that assumption, and I think we can work out something that's going to be satisfactory. I'd like to call our speaker now, Marianne Van Zyl. Evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mary Adams. My name is Marianne Van Zyl. I live in the Westlake Village portion of Thousand Oaks. I appreciate the time to make a public comment. Some of you may know that I work at City Hall. I'm speaking as a public citizen. I was able to walk to work today. I live near Triumph Park, and the reason why that's possible is because my husband and I bought our house 18 years ago. Our house value has doubled, but the salaries at City Hall have not. New teachers and new city employees, civil engineers, et cetera, police officers and firefighters cannot afford to live here. This contributes to our traffic problems, and it impacts the character of the city in that, as my husband and I, when we moved here, we wanted to be the victims of our own bureaucracy. As we said, we wanted to live where we worked. If we think about attracting startup businesses, where, especially biotech businesses, where startup salaries may be low, with the promise of stock options being one of the ways that people are compensated, those people won't be able to live here either, even if they do have PhDs. The housing market is reacting to a short housing supply with grossly inflated housing prices and rents. But it's not a true supply and demand situation because it's not a free market. It has been controlled by regulations and zoning laws that have favored single-family housing. If you take a look at our street layouts, you can't take the bus anywhere because everybody lives on a cul-de-sac. I just would encourage City Council that Thousand Oaks needs to create zoning and building regulations that allow and support building higher density housing. I also want to say that I am, for want of a better term, I don't know, this may not be the right term, but I'm a YIMBY. I take a look at the Kmart site that's on my way to school, that's at my freeway exit, and I would love to see high-density housing there. I would love to see 3 or 4 story housing there. I would like to see as many people who work in the city live in the city. So if that ever comes up before City Council, you might get some of my neighbors who complain, but I'm going to stand here and say, yes, build that in my backyard. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ms. Van Zyl. All righty. Staff, did you have any other comments that you'd like to make? We're good? All right. I want to thank Ms. Tam and Mr. Forbes for their presentation this evening. And there's no vote necessary, but I think we had a very good discussion, and we'll continue this throughout the year as we continue to work on our general plan update. And with that, we're going to move on now to city manager comments. Did you have any follow-up, Mr. Powers?
Just to let the city council know that our next meeting will be 2 weeks from tonight on the 25th of February. We'll have a public hearing on some energy services for LED lighting retrofits that'll come from our Public Works Department. A department report on refunding of lease revenue bonds at the library. Our next consideration of the campus master plan, and the award of the Thousand Oaks Boulevard streetscape improvement efforts, along with our community enhancement grant awards. That's all for that meeting.
All right, thank you, Mr. Powers. And we don't have any closed sessions this evening, so we are going to adjourn this meeting tonight in the memory of a longtime champion for open space in the Conejo Valley, Julia Osborne Gurley. She passed away January 23rd. Julie grew up on a small family farm in Menlo Park and developed her lifelong love of the outdoors in the Sierra Nevada mountains as an avid hiker and backpacker. Julie moved to Thousand Oaks in the early 1980s, where she left a legacy not just on the land, but on open space advocates that make up our local conservation community. Soon after her retirement as a federal labor attorney, Julie was appointed to the Conejo Open Space Trails Advisory Committee and served as a board member of the Conejo Open Space Foundation as both secretary and president. Julie was deeply committed to habitat restoration, spending countless hours removing non-native plants, especially fennel, from the Costco open space. Her tenacity and leadership led to the eradication of fennel from the Wildwood Mesa, as well as near eradication on the Western Plateau. Julie worked tirelessly for Trails Education Days, recruiting volunteers, leading hikes, and doing whatever was needed to ensure that future generations have a connection to the outdoors. As Costco's trail network expanded, Julie saw a need for public participation in its care. She was instrumental in creating the Adopt a Trail volunteer program, which began in 2003, and today there are 52 trails adopted by individuals, families, and businesses. Julie was a special person who truly cared about people and led our community in volunteerism. She touched thousands of lives in her environmentalism and the preservation of our valuable open space and shared ecology. Her impacts on our community will be remembered. Julie Osborne Gurley leaves behind a host of friends and open space compatriots. We mourn her passing and extend sincere condolences to her family. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to our council meeting tonight. I'm going to adjourn for a couple of weeks, and we'll see you then.